Good evening, everyone. Our school board meeting is now in session, and I welcome you here this evening. We're going to begin by standing for the moment of silence, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. First item on our agenda is public comments. And just a reminder, comments or requests should be brief and to the point and shall not exceed 3 minutes and must not mention specific names of students or personnel. Public comments will be aired, but the board typically will not respond to individual comments. Our first speaker this evening is Eileen Johnson.
Good evening. Some of you know me, some of you don't. I'm Eileen Johnson, born and raised and plan to die here in Georgetown. And I want to thank each and every one of you for standing up and raising your hand and saying that you want to be on this board, because it is a daunting task. And it's one that you don't take lightly, and I know that y'all work super hard and you've taken your own personal time to do this. What I'm here tonight about is prevention of drugs. And I realize that it is not your mandate to do drug prevention. I understand that clearly. But in the last few years of my life, I have learned, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change and change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. So I believe that we can make a difference. Not you, not alcohol and drug abuse, not the law enforcement, but together we can make a difference. I have statistics here that will scare you, and you will not sleep tonight knowing how bad it is. We lost 30 last year to overdoses, and of that 20 some odd were fentanyl. In the first quarter of this year, this is in Georgetown County, in the first quarter of this year, we've had 6 already, and I tried to get a hold of Chase and I could not get the update for the second quarter. We are now, everybody's using Narcan. Now the schools are having to use Narcan. Y'all are going to be getting that. So it's a real problem. So what I'm proposing is this. I can get you all the data you need. We've got hundreds of thousands of people dying every year. What I'm proposing is that we sit down with alcohol, drug abuse, law enforcement, some administrators, some students, because they know what's going on. They may not say it, but they know what's going on. Sit down, put together everybody's resources, including the school's resources, and what y'all do and not do, and come up with a plan that will be acceptable to the schools that we can implement to work with the school board and with the schools. Something that will be age appropriate for each section of the schools. Because y'all, we can't bury any more children. And I realize it's not your mandate, but y'all have these children most of their lives. And in my opinion, if we fail to try to put a plan together, we're failing them. They need information. Some of my ideas were just roll a coffin into the common area and let a student file and look up how many kids died that day in the United States.
Ms. Johnson, your time is up.
Okay.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson.
But that's my proposal. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Mr. Rudolph Brown.
Chairman Gaskill, members of the board, Mr. Price, I bring you greetings from Transportation for Georgetown County School District. We have a concern with the new position that you have proposed. The Chief Operating Officer Our concern is that transportation should not be lumped into that position. Transportation needs to have its own entity for Georgetown County School District. When I look at the job description for the chief operating officers, all that entails that he has to do, transportation will get lost in the shuffle. Meaning, transportation needs a liaison between Department of Transportation, Columbia, and the Director of Transportation, which I'm requesting be in place, and which will report to the board. This needs to happen. There's no way possible that transportation of its importance will be not neglected with the duties that you have for the CEO to be performing. And if y'all haven't seen the detail of that job description, you need to look at it, because it entails a lot. And there's a lot of manpower, man-hours deserving of that position. And transportation needs to have its own entity. We shouldn't be no different than our neighboring counties, districts. So I ask that you look at this and make sure that we can make a decision that we can have an entity representing transportation. We have made it through with our prior transportation person because that person had knowledge of the position. But at times, his other duties overwhelmed him, and the responsibility fell to the coordinators to make it happen. And I'm saying to you that these two jobs needs to be separated. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Ms. Vanessa White.
Good afternoon. I'm going to piggyback on what Mr. Brown just stated. I'm with Georgetown County School District. I'm a route coordinator for the Georgetown area. You have behind me a route coordinator, Ms. Haynes from the Carvers Bay area, route coordinator, Ms. Sharon McDonald for the Andrews area, and of course, Mr. Rudolph from Waccamaw. And again, I'm from Georgetown, and we have drivers representing each area. One of our concerns, Martin Luther King once said, "Injustice somewhere is injustice everywhere." Our U.S. Representative, Mr. Lewis, John Lewis once said, "Good trouble." Our concern is we want to be treated fairly. We don't want people to see color when it comes to transportation. There's things that happened in the past that has been swept under the rug. We know it, we've seen it. Whoever runs transportation as COO, and I concur with Mr. Rudolph when he stated that transportation is a large, demanding area where you can't have a lot of areas under transportation. It's demanding. And one person should be over transportation, not running multiples of areas. And that person should only see, again, it shouldn't be color. It should be just that person. And when you see color, you run into trouble. And with us, we work as a unit. We're here as a unit of one. We want to be heard, and in being heard, this is what we think should happen. Has anyone came to us and asked us about it? No, no one has never. We've always been left out as an individual, even though they say that we're the first that the kids see and the last they see in the afternoon. But our voice as route coordinators is not always heard for our opinion of what we think should be done or how it should be done. And in that, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for hearing me and hearing my voice and Mr. Rudolph's voice that represent us as one. Because when one is cut, all of us is cut. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Mr. Winchester.
Good afternoon. Protocol already being established. Last week was intense. Hopefully this week won't be like that. But I do want to talk a little bit about something that I think we all can agree on. Something that can't be seen subjectively, something that's very objective, some facts. It's a fact that your mission statement touts diversity for all students. That's something that can't be disputed. It's a fact that in many schools, especially in the Waccamaw, Rosemary, and others, that mission statement does not hold true. As a matter of fact, in many of these schools, it looks a lot more like segregation than the diversity you talk about in your mission statement. That's a fact. So, understanding these facts, how do we change it? We say that we're doing recruitment. We say that we're open to individuals of all walks of life as they apply for positions. But in order to bring in these diverse candidates that we speak of, we have to aggressively recruit them. So that means going to these HBCUs, and when we go there, not just setting up a tent, not just going to say we checked the box. We need to go there and speak to people, and we need to have the right person in place and empowered to make that happen. That means we need someone in leadership in HR that looks like the population we're trying to recruit. What I'm proposing and what I'm asking this board to do is to consider a director of diversity and recruitment. I think that would be greatly helpful, and I think that it will go a long way as far as recruitment. And I will even, whenever this individual is in place, help in that aspect as well to get some qualified candidates in. I just feel like we can do a lot more. I'm not going to go there. I just feel like a lot more can be done. I appreciate your time.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Mr. Marvin Neal.
Good evening. I'm Marvin Neal. I'm from the NAACP South Carolina State Conference. This is the third time the NAACP has addressed the school board reference to vandalism at Waccamaw Middle and High School. During our investigation of the two instances that I'm talking about tonight, we have noticed the biasness when it comes to punishment and the difference in the punishment as it relates to black versus white students. The black young lady at Waccamaw Middle School was falsely accused of vandalism, videoing another child throwing a rock at a car window. She received 5 days suspension, which was dismissed in the court system. But yet still she received a suspension. She spent that time. No investigation done. This same young lady was falsely accused again of creating an uproar by having her hair pulled out in the hallway at Waccamaw Middle School from the scalp of her head. It's missing, just in case you need to get to the point. She was suspended again for 3 days. For 3 days, for having her hair pulled out. On both accounts, she was suspended immediately without any investigation. Her teacher allegedly told the principal that she did not do it. That's what she said. She stated to the deputy superintendent that she don't have anyone of color to go to at that school. The principal have a lack of integrity at that school for falsely accusing that student without investigating. If she investigated, she would have known that her hair was pulled out and those was false charges on both accounts. That principal have a lack of integrity because she told a lie on that student and failed to follow school policy on punishment. She needs to be fired for targeting that child, and she needs to be fired. When was someone sitting where you are look at this child and call that parent and call that child, because I think they deserve an apology for what happened there. That has not happened yet. No empathy. It might look good, especially in a court of law. On this this child at middle school, black child, law enforcement took charge, which became a felony charge. The correction, as stated by the superintendent, to the failed leadership of that school was a conversation with the white principal. The black child was innocent and received 10 days suspension. I remind you of the white students that did the vandalism at Waccamaw High School that got in-school suspension, I guess after graduation, however that works. When will the proper authority from this school district investigate those white students and put back in the hands of the safety and at-risk officer? Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Because Black lives matter in this school district and all the others also.
The next speaker is Mr. Gibson.
Good evening. I, along with Mr. Neal, was here last time talking about the vandalism at Waccamaw High School. I happened to read the timeline written by the district in Gab News of the so-called prank at Waccamaw High. It's unbelievable, and an insult to my intelligence. This is strictly a cover-up. It has all the elements of a perfect storm. When students will pick a day, Sunday, when they were able to walk into a school through an open door, the alarm was disarmed and run amok throughout the campus, damaging, vandalizing the school. They had inside help, and whoever helped them should be held accountable. I was born at night, but not last night. I have several questions to ask the district and the superintendent. Why weren't the police called when they found the vandalism initially? And this one really gets me. When do custodians work on Sundays? Why would the alarm system be disarmed? And how were the students able to camp out on school grounds undetected? Where were their parents? If my kids stayed out all night long, I'm gonna want to know where the hell you at. They said they had a mock drag race. That's an outright lie. Read it. It was a drag race. There was nothing fake about it. I gave each one of you, they say all I do is get up here and talk. Well, I'm going to show y'all today. The top picture, the one in the red, y'all got a copy, y'all can look at it. If that was written on your house, what would it be called? Vandalism. The middle picture is a videotape of the drag race. See the guy in the middle between two cars on the track at Waccamaw High School. Standing in the middle, how dangerous is that? Then the third one, they didn't even report that. They didn't tell you all about that. Toilets full of dirt. How much did it cost to get that flushed out? This is embarrassing. It's on the internet and it's viral. And you know, I happened to see a Target cart, a picture of a Target cart full of empty beer cans at Waccamaw High School, but somebody took the picture down. I couldn't get that one, but I got these three. Now, I want to know, the police need to do an investigation.
Thank you, Mr. Gibson.
You're
Thank you very
welcome,
much.
but they need to do an investigation.
Thank you. Okay, that is the end of public comments. Moving on with our agenda, the approval of the minutes. You have received the minutes. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Okay, it's been moved and it's been seconded. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
The motion is carried. The next item is the adoption of the agenda. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
It's been moved and it's been seconded.
Second.
All in favor of approval of the agenda, please say aye. Aye. All opposed? The agenda has been approved. Our first and only action item tonight is our personnel list. You have all received. The administration recommends approval of the personnel list as presented. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
It's been moved.
Second.
Second. Is there any discussion about the personnel list? Hearing none, I call for the question. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. All opposed, say nay. The motion is carried. The next set of items is information items, and the first one is Ms. Lisa Johnson, update on sale of 8% GO bonds sold through SCAGO GO Spring Debt Programs. I'm not sure, I don't know what all those acronyms mean.
I can help you with that if you really
Okay,
want to
thank
know. I did want to just give you an update tonight on the sale of the bonds. You approved the board resolution that gave us the ability to sell the bonds on April 4th. You actually approved a not-to-exceed $7.5 million bond for purpose of funding annual maintenance, equipment, capital projects, and paying for the cost to issue the bonds. The bonds sold on May 2nd through a tax-exempt competitive sale. We were in a group of 25 other school districts, and the total borrowing that SCAGO put out was for $88.9 million. So there were 6 bidders, and the true interest rates ranged from 3.22% to 3.64%, which are very good rates at this particular time. JP Morgan Securities won the bid at 3.21. We closed the sale on May 17th. The par amount, or the principal amount of the bonds, is $6.4 million, and we received a reoffering premium of $87,781. After we paid our issuance cost, we deposited $6.5 million into the Capital Projects Fund for next year's capital projects plan that you all have been talking about over the last couple of meetings. We'll repay the debt of $6.4 million plus interest of $254,000 from the debt service fund on March 1st, 2024. So that's where that stood. It's a very good sale.
Are there any questions for Ms. Johnson? Hearing none, we're going to let you continue with the proposed general fund budget.
Yes, sir.
23-24.
We're actually going to go through the presentation with you next week, but this is just to give you, we took what you had told us, advised us you were interested in doing. We have put it into the document. We're going to go from $99.1 million to $108.2 million, which is about a $9.09 million increase on both revenue and expenditures. That does include the 2 mil increase, which will bring our millage up to 121.1. This was just to give you a snapshot and a summary of, you'll see more of it next week, but this was just to give you an idea of where we stood after we put the items in that you all told us to.
Ms. Johnson, I do have a question.
Yes, sir.
What is a reoffering premium?
The JP Morgan turns around and sells our bonds, and so because of the good credit rating and the large sale that we were participating in, it's extra money. It's a premium on the sale of the bonds.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions? Thank you, Ms. Johnson.
Thank you.
Next on the agenda is Mr. Street, Community Eligibility Provision Renewal for School Nutrition Grant.
Good evening, Chairman Gaskins, Mr. Price, board members, and distinguished guests. I stand before you tonight just to kind of give you an update on food service and really focusing on community eligibility provision for our district. If you go to slide 2, Just kind of an overview of what community eligibility provision is, or I'll refer to from now on as CEP. A little less of a tongue twister there. So CEP is designed for districts with higher poverty rates and allows school districts in the food service department to feed students at no cost. Currently, where we are, I'll get to that in just a second, but it's just a way to help our community and help our students as we're there. So currently, where we are now is our current layout. We have 14 of our 18 schools that are participating in CEP at the moment. We've been this way for about 12 years or so. We've had 14 schools. The 4 schools that do not participate currently are Georgetown High School, Waccamaw High School, Waccamaw Intermediate School, and Waccamaw Elementary School. There's a lot of questions of why Georgetown High School doesn't participate, but we traded them a long time ago for an elementary school so that all of our elementary students were receiving free meals. You know, they're the most susceptible and the most critical to make sure that they have food. So we did that a long time ago. At this rate, schools are able to, that participate are able to feed all students for free. And it doesn't matter what their socioeconomic status is at that point. There's, you know, nobody's marked as free or reduced other than the fact of the students that are directly certified through participation in SNAP, TANF, and now Medicaid. So those are the 3 categories that are classified for directly certified students. With that, we use a factor of 1.6, and it's based on the USDA. They came up with that factor. So the example that I have is if a school has 50% directly certified students in it, then we would report that 80% of the students of that school would be eligible for free meals or reduced meals. But since we don't take applications, that's the formula that we have to use at those schools. Currently, we have 3 different groupings of schools within the district for reimbursement claiming rates. Group 1, we claim all meals at 100% free. And we have about 4 schools in that group, and they're pretty high poverty index, so we claim all the meals at those schools 100% free. Group 2 claims at 64% free and 36% full pay. So from the USDA's reimbursement standpoint, we get the higher reimbursement rate for 64% of the meals, and we get the very lowest reimbursement rate for 36% of those meals. And then group 3, we claim meals at 79% free and 21% full pay. And again, that ratio is just the higher rate and the lower rate. So moving on to the next slide. So what we're proposing as we move forward in next year is just kind of background based on the direct certified percentages over the last 3 years. What we've been able to do is we've been able to really see an increase in those percentages, and you'll see it kind of trends up and down a little bit, but 41.4% in 2021, 37.29% in 21-22, and now in 22-23 we're reporting 60.32% of directly certified students. So that's a huge increase. A lot of that increase is because the USDA this year piloted several states and allowed us to use Medicaid eligible students included in that count of directly certified. In the past, we haven't been able to include them. So we've seen a huge spike in our numbers for directly certified students, which allows us to then propose a new model for CEP for Georgetown County School District. So our proposed new CEP layout that we're looking at for the next year is really to go from 14 schools to 18 schools. So every one of our schools in the district would serve meals at no cost to any of our students or any of our parents. To me, that's a big win. We don't have to worry about applications, and there's several other things that we don't have to worry about anymore. But what we don't have to worry about is anybody going hungry or having to worry about how am I going to come up as a parent over the course of a month. And it may not seem like a lot, but if you kind of do the math at $2.25 a meal, 20 days of operations, it's an extra $50 a month, right? Just for lunch. That's not including breakfast. And that's at a full paid rate. So with this layout, we would no longer have 3 groupings, we would go to 1 grouping. And with that grouping, we would be claiming at 96.51% of our meals served as full reimbursement rate and only 3.49% at the lowest reimbursement rate. And again, what does this really mean? So all students will eat breakfast and lunch for free, no charge to parents. Participation in breakfast and lunch programs will see an increase. When we did COVID, we saw about an 8% increase in our meal participation when everybody was eating free. This past year, we've seen about that 8% decline in meals. So hopefully we'll see that increase in participation go back up. Parents will no longer have to complete a meal application each year, and for those of you that don't know, that becomes a chore and it becomes a nightmare. And parents don't fill it out, and then at the end of the year, they end up with they're getting letters all year, and at the end of the year, they have a balance. So, I didn't do the application, or I did it last year, and it's only good for 1 year. So we won't have to worry about that anymore. No more outstanding lunch balances. So just to kind of give you an idea, it's about a $72,000 hit we can take off the top. So we won't accumulate lunch balances anymore because we won't have to worry about it. This also is a revenue neutral decision that I've done the math, I've done the numbers, and it's going to be revenue neutral, and in fact it could project to increase revenue slightly for the food service department if the participation continues to grow. So we should see a slightly uptick in our revenue. And I just kind of gave you an overview of what our participation and meal counts were for the last 3 years. And you can see 21-22, we did a total of 1.376 million meals, and 22-23 this year is 1.339 million meals. And then next year, with the increase in participation, I'm proposing about a 1.4 million meal total for what we're going to do. So it's a lot of meals that our staff produces every year. That's breakfast and lunch. And you can see the participation numbers, and those are based on participation of students that are in attendance as well. So that's not just total participation, but those that are there for that day. But for that, I did add one slide that was not in the original presentation, but if you have the Google slideshow, it's in your slideshow now on your computer. It talks about Proviso 1.68. So we just got this information Friday. I talked to Mr. Price and Ms. Thompson about this. So there's going to be one more step that we need to do this year. This proviso has recently passed, and it requires the school district to, we have to conduct an update every year on an analysis on our directly certified numbers. But this year with the proviso, now we have to ask you to approve a resolution for us to participate in CEP. And again, we've participated for at least the last 12 years. And so what we're going to come back to you next week with just a very quick action item on the agenda is a resolution to approve for us to participate as a district, solely district-wide, in the community eligibility provision program. So that's the last piece of that, is just Proviso 1.68 that just recently passed, and now it's going to be a requirement for us to do this. So, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have, and that concludes my presentation.
Thank you very much. I think
you.
this is a big plus for our district, and thank you very much. And we look forward to voting on that at our next meeting. The next on our agenda is the Athletic Capital Project Addition. Mr. Bob Seebeyer.
Good evening, Chairman Gaskins, Superintendent Price, members of the board. Pleasure to be here tonight to give you some additional information on the requested athletic upgrades at Carvers Bay High School and the softball field house at Waccamaw High School. First, I want to start with Carvers Bay High School. Is that one of the reasons we gave improvements to the other three high schools? They were all completed in the 80s. Whereas Carvers Bay High School Stadium was completed in the early 2000s. So the others were somewhat older than Carvers Bay High School when we started the program. Carvers Bay High School also today has some advantages over the other three stadiums. There are 2 concession stands at Carvers Bay High School, and there are 3 group restrooms, including one at the visitors' bleacher side, which none of the other stadiums have. And I don't bring this as a comparison that, you know, we don't need to do anything, but want to make sure that you had all the information about Carvers Bay High School Stadium. And one of the reasons we did less updates there is that it was a much newer facility. On the field house at Waccamaw High School. I wanted to show you the other 4 campuses that we have so that you get some idea of what we're trying to compare to. This is Andrews High School. Softball field is over here. The baseball field's over here. There is a field house right here that could be used by either the baseball or the softball. My understanding is the softball team does not use that field house. The auxiliary gym also has some team rooms in there. That is also not far from the softball field. And I'm not sure if they use that. That has been discussed before about them using that area as a field house, but they do not have a formal field house for the baseball or the softball. That's the one field house for the entire campus over there. And there is an old one over here for football, but that's, again, very primitive setup over there. At Carvers Bay High School, again, the softball field is down here, baseball field's over here. There is a concession and restroom area right here, but the closest field house is right over here, and the auxiliary gym team rooms are back over here. My understanding, I'm not sure that either team uses this field house, baseball or the softball field. So Carvers Bay effectively does not have a field house for either team. At Georgetown High School, again, this is the softball field. There's restrooms over here, and then there is a field house here that the boosters had built for Georgetown High School and the softball field. Now, the baseball team plays at Mike Johnson Field, and there is a field house there that was built by the boosters for Georgetown or for Mike Johnson Field. And the softball team is really the only team that has a formal field house for their softball players. And then lastly, this is Waccamaw High School. Again, the baseball field's up here. They do have a field house for the baseball team. That was provided by the boosters. And down here we have the softball field. There are restrooms right here. The closest field house is right over here. And I know the softball team doesn't use that, and talked about the possibility of them using that, but there's so many spring sports at Waccamaw High School with lacrosse, soccer, and track, they don't think that's feasible for them to use that field house. But that's quite a quick summary, is that not all campuses have field houses for the softball. Some of them don't even have for baseball. So I'm just trying to give you that information about the field house at Waccamaw High School. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any other questions you might have.
I just have a comment in regards to the entrance that Carvers Bay does not have that the other school have. That's one of those obvious things that you notice. And doing graduations this year right here, fields look beautiful, but it's the one thing that was missing at just one of the high schools. So we want to make sure we know that we're at a Georgetown County school whenever we go to it. And that was one thing that's obvious that you can not see at Carvers Bay, and it makes you wonder, is this a district school or not? Because every other school has it. So I understand that they have these hidden concessions, but I would love to see that obvious interest put in place as well.
Yes, sir.
I second that. I think I brought this up last year about Carvers Bay High School. I spoke to you about it personally.
Yes, sir.
It was a wish list at the time, and I'm certainly still would like to see this happen, because all the other schools really have a good identification, and it's good when you're bringing visitors in versus home fans, kind of keep a little bit of separation going in different directions. So I think it's important for a lot of reasons.
Is it too early to ask the question roughly how much something like this would cost?
No, we've got already given numbers that for the, at Carvers Bay High School, the entrance pavilion, additional parking, and the ticket booth for the baseball field, that's, I think, $1,079,000, just short of $1.1 million. And the field house at Waccamaw, I think, is $750,000, something of that nature.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
If I may, Mr.
Yes.
At one of our recent meetings, is that working? Okay. At one of our recent meetings, when we presented the 5-year facility plan, these two items were listed at the end, along with everything else that was planned for our capital funds for year 1 through year 5. And there was not enough money to add these two projects into that. So in order to do that, there'd be one of two options. Number one would be to take things off of the 5-year plan as far as maintenance and upkeep, to add these two things on, or to look at a one-time transfer out of reserve fund balance to tackle one or both of these projects. It would not be a recurring cost. It would be a one-time cost. And so if that's something that the board is interested in considering, we can put it on our next regular board meeting agenda for consideration, since we've got 2 board members who've expressed vocal interest in reviewing those, and we can put these 2 items as separate items on the next board meeting agenda. But as far as funding goes, there'd be one of 2 ways to do that. So I wanted to share that information with the board for your consideration.
Yep.
So do we have to make that request now as far as having it on our next action list?
I've already made a note that we'll put that. That'll be on the July board meeting agenda for consideration and discussion.
Thank you very much.
And then we'll go from there.
Thank you.
And those would be discussion items, Mr.
Yes, ma'am.
Price?
Discussion items at that point.
Thank you. So that
And
we
then
could look at the things that are on that list, so we would know if there were things that we could exchange those for, et cetera.
Correct.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next thing on the agenda is the discipline committee report. We had a discipline committee that looked at the discipline plan that the administration set forth, and we had some of our members who met with Dr. Giles and Mr. Price. And I'm going to let Mr. DuBose lead the conversation, then we'll hear from other board members who would like to make any comments or any questions.
Okay.
Mr. DuBose.
All right, very good. Well, just to recap, at a previous board meeting some time ago, Dr. Giles gave us a general overview of the progress that was being made on the discipline policy, or the revised discipline policy. And a couple of the new board members wanted a little more detail as far as the draft and what it looked like. And so Dr. Giles agreed, and so we met with her, Superintendent Price, and Mr. Alan Walters. And the board members that were there were Randy Walker, Robert Cox, and myself. And we had a thorough, good review of that draft. And in fact, I think to a person, we were very impressed with the scope and the detail, the thinking that had gone into that. Had a lot of questions. We got good answers. So all of the board members basically got a copy of that draft. And since that second meeting, we've had a chance to, or some of us have had a chance to look at that in more detail. And we've got more questions, and so a lot of those will be posed tonight as we listen to the presentation. But we wanted to compliment the committee on the job that they did, because it's a lot of work and some good thinking. And anybody else, I think?
Anybody else would like to add anything? Mr. Cox or Mr. Walker?
No, well, I think the meeting was very informative. Dr. Giles, I want to thank you for a good job, because she made our job a little easy with a lot of questions, but she's had everything laid out. What I like to see going forward is we make sure we're being consistent on a level field across the district. And there's still a few things to iron out, and we just got to make sure that we're following policy around the district.
Okay. Mr. Cox?
Yeah, I got a few things. I want to talk just a second about vandalism, because that has a lot to do with this discipline policy.
Vandalism is listed also in the bus part of this discipline policy, and it basically is a level 3 offense. There are several suggested interventions, and there's a lot of consequences for vandalism. And I'll get to vandalism at schools in a second, and I'll make this as quick as possible. But if you look at the consequences on vandalism on a bus, there's not a dollar amount. So in other words, what my point will be in a minute is we put a dollar amount when it comes to vandalizing school property. I don't think there needs to be a dollar amount. Vandalism is vandalism. If a child tears our schools up, tears our school buses up, there shouldn't be a dollar amount put on school property, period. It's not listed on a bus, but it is listed, I think, Keith, as greater than $2,000, is a level 3, if I can recall. Vandalism is vandalism. Now, what occurred at Waccamaw High School was definitely greater than $2,000, I would assume, okay? The thing that bothers me is the 5 to 10 days of suspension. There's also a restitution, and there's a recommendation for expulsion. To me, vandalism should have severe consequences for children that want to tear school property up. I think that 5-day suspension is just a slap on the hand. I think we need to make it more severe. I know kids cheat, I know kids fight, I know kids do things like that, but when it comes to vandalizing our property, there needs to be some more severe consequences, such as recommendation for expulsion. So let's take a look at the bus vandalism policy, compare it to the property vandalism, and let's get a little tougher on this because to me, vandalism is vandalism. Last but not least, bullying is not listed on the school bus policy. It describes another form of bullying. Bullying in the conduct section talks about even on a school bus, but I want to make sure, Superintendent Price, that bullying on a school bus, because let me tell you, if you want to go somewhere where kids are bullied, it's on a school bus. It's on a school bus. You know, I know of a child that committed suicide in this nation because of being bullied on a school bus. So we need tougher policies on bullying on school buses, and I want to see tougher policies on bullying, period, in Georgetown County. That's the two comments I have concerning vandalism and bullying in this county.
Thank you, Mr. Cox. Ms. Ford would like to speak, and she is joining us virtually. Let's see if we can get her voice loud. Okay, Ms. Ford?
Hi, yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I want to first thank everyone, the committee, for coming together and digging into it and getting some more information about the discipline and conduct. I was glad to see a section devoted to the bus driver, to incidents that occur on buses. But my concern is how that's going to take place. How are they going to enforce those? How they're going to enforce the discipline. The bus drivers can't do it. They don't have the ability to do it. So I'm just curious to know how they're going to enforce law, so to speak, on the buses. And because I think it's really critical that the students, that order is restored on the buses. There have been a lot of incidents that have occurred, and safety is of the utmost importance. The other question I have is, and this will probably be maybe up for discussion at a future board meeting, I know that one of the remedies or one of the solutions for an infraction is a referral to the Howard Center. One of my questions is, what is going on at Howard now? You know, what kind of evaluation measures are going on to let us know that the new plans that have been put in place are actually effective. I suspect that they are not. I understand there are still a lot of issues over at Howard to where students still want to go there. They don't really consider it a place where they're going to be disciplined or whether they're going to have to take responsibility for their actions. So I'm a little concerned about how effective that level of enforcement is at Howard and what kind of measures can be put in place moving forward to make sure that students receive the adequate resources, support, and also discipline that they need when they do go over to the Howard Center. So those are my comments.
Thank you, Ms. Ford.
And I just have just a couple of questions, I guess. I'm looking here at level 3 on the reentry, the reentry meeting. I'm just wondering, are the parents a part of this reentry meeting?
Part of what?
I would think so.
Oh, thank you. And the second part of that question is going to be, are the parents in situations where there's a victim, like a staff member or a bus driver, are they a part of the reentry meeting as well? Thank you.
All right, so first, good evening to Chairman Gaskins, members of the board, Mr. Price, District Administration, and to our extended Georgetown County School District family. So several questions were posed, but just for the immediate question, Mr. Moore, the reentry meeting does consist of the student involved, the parent, a counselor, as well as administration. And that ensures that we are able to have those restorative practices in place so that our measures are not just punitive when we look at students' discipline, but we also want to restore and modify students' behavior so that we don't have recurring problems. Of course, things do happen repeatedly sometimes, but our intent is to do the opposite, to restore that behavior. So that reentry meeting does involve a conversation or discussion, more so the do's and don'ts of how we're going to move forward.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I have a question. I should know the answer, but I'm going to ask. Do we have cameras on our buses?
Yes.
We do. They're on all our buses? Okay.
Thank you very much. From the onset of the discipline committee that we said several meetings ago is that in any plan, the board, and this is sort of going to lead into reviewing this policy, is a policy that will be put in place that's going to be consistent, that's going to be equitable across all schools, all students, and that it be carried out. Because that's the thing that we heard from listening to teachers, that it's not consistent across the district. And that's what we hope to be able to put in place, and that the board will hold you guys accountable to making it happen. So with that as a lead-in, we're going to move on to the next part of our agenda, which is policy JICDA-E, Student Code of Conduct, which actually puts the Code of Conduct as a policy to update our policy.
Question, are we through discussing questions about the draft itself? Because I have several.
Oh, you have something else about the draft?
I definitely do.
Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Mr. Bose.
So it was my understanding, just as I was reading through this, and I went through it in detail, and I just want to check my own understanding, that with each successive violation, that the intervention and consequence would be a minimum of one step or level higher than those chosen for the previous violation. And if that's the case, I could find no wording to that in the policy at all. And if that's the intent, I think that needs to be specifically stated. Okay? The next one, it was not clear to me as I read it if an intervention required a consequence. And personally, I think an intervention with no consequence is a waste of time. But again, in the same vein, there was no wording that indicates a consequence must be attached to an intervention. Maybe we're supposed to assume that it will be, but it's not spelled out anywhere in the policy. There's some wording about on the code of conduct, and I guess that's what we're going to discuss next.
Yes, that's coming up next.
Is it okay to talk about that now?
Sure, go ahead.
There's wording there that says basically the administration may reclassify behavior misconduct level 1 as a disruptive conduct level 2 if the student engages in activity more than 3 documented instances. And I think that term may should be more forceful. It should be must or will be. If somebody's going to commit a level 1 offense, I think that's more than just, continuing on with offenses. I think that should move up to level 2. Regarding first level violations, and it's in that too, the wording says an activity more than 3 documented instances could be construed as meaning violations of the same activity. That wasn't clear to me. Are we talking about a level 1 violation of the same activity 3 times, or are we talking about 3 violations of any level 1?
Is that something, Dr. Giles, could you answer that? Give clarification on that, please?
Yeah, so to understand, the documented incidents do not have to be the same. It could be 3 level 1 offenses. Cheating, tardy, whatever the 3 may be. It's an accumulation of level 1s.
Okay, good. We might want to make that clearer, that
Okay.
because it's not clear. I was confused about that. So, regarding classifications of level 1 offenses, right now, at level 1 includes cheating and forgery. And to me, those need to be at least level 2. They seem much more serious than cutting class and swearing.
Tardiness.
So that's just an observation.
Okay.
On page 1, I guess that's describing the 3 levels of violations. Under level 3, it says interventions may be used when a student returns to school after a suspension or on strict probation. And it says level 1 and 2 interventions may be considered. And it seems to me that if level 1 interventions for someone who has committed a criminal offense seems pretty lenient. And so I'm not sure why that was there. It just seems really lenient. Under level 3 code of conduct, and I picked just arson as an example, 2 consequences are listed. One has an asterisk explaining that recommended expulsion is mandatory. And my question was, why not just state that instead of the asterisk and then having to hunt for the asterisk to see what it means? So if I'm reading it correctly, an individual would receive out-of-school suspension for 5 to 10 days together with mandatory recommended expulsion, that they would not be separate in that case, say, of arson.
You're correct.
Is
Yes,
that
sir.
correct?
Yes, sir.
So maybe that could be spelled out a little better. And the other, and it's just a comment, I'm wondering if we have far too many choices of interventions. It seems like there are hundreds of them as potential, and maybe we ought to think about narrowing it down a little bit. But that's all I had. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Dr. Giles.
Thank you. So hopefully some of the questions that were posed will be answered within the presentation, and certainly if not, if we do not answer them within the presentation, certainly when we come back before you, or we can answer at the end.
Okay, super, thank you.
All right, so again, this evening's presentation, it is a continuation of the initial Code of Conduct presentation. As we look at the purpose, the intent of this informational item, again, it is to build upon state regulation and existing policy to establish behavior modifications and intervention frameworks, outline in a template form the expectations and disciplinary procedures, as well as re-emphasize the goal of having safe and structured learning environments in our schools. So just a recap for those who may not have been exposed to our previous presentation, we began with the end in mind. So this presentation focuses on our second bulleted item, which is to develop a district-wide code of conduct that is consistent from school to school, and it's in alignment with state regulations as well as board policy. Just as reference points, these are the complete policies. The AR, the administrative rule, and the file speak more specifically to the consequences and things of that nature, but again, they are in alignment with state regulation. So, as the drafts were presented, the template does include offenses based on levels, which the 3 levels are behavioral misconduct, level 1, disruptive conduct, level 2, and criminal conduct is level 3. It's also including behavioral management strategies as well as interventions, consequences, which are possible sanctions to be applied, and it's all based on the level of misconduct to determine whether the SRO is involved. Looking at the actual procedures, and again, hopefully this will help with some of the questions. This is the basic disciplinary procedure that we ask all administrators to follow. They investigate the misconduct. Note that law enforcement and/or the SRO are notified immediately based on the level of misconduct. If an administrator is unsure, notification should be and is made to the SRO for determination. Parents and/or guardians are notified of the misconduct. Consequences are assigned and interventions. So again, the misconduct does not alone have a consequence, but we are trying to modify the student's behaviors by assigning an intervention as well. It is important to note that administration does have discretion of all documented incidents of that current school year. The asterisk again represents the progression of possible consequences. So provided for you are the drafts completed in a template form. And just as further note, the guidelines here for the discipline progression, they're unchanged from the last presentation. They outline the progression and options for students who have been recommended for expulsion, and those 4 options are probation, Howard Alternative School, home-based, and/or expulsion. So again, we've asked for suggestions as well as feedback, and we thank our discipline committee of the board for providing some of that feedback. We will certainly continue to take it back to our committee in order to provide answers, but know that the next steps, hopefully, are to provide a training for our administrators in our administrative workshop in July. Over time, what we have learned is that punitive and exclusionary forms of discipline have been historically the norm, and it's not always necessarily effective in isolation. The goal, again, of this code of conduct is to reestablish consistency as well as fairness in our practices and procedures. Important to note is also that professional development will be provided throughout the year, as we acknowledge that restoring and modifying students' behavior may include changing classroom management strategies as well as expectations. In other words, what does it look like to make sure that we're helping our teachers be successful in the classroom? So again, it involves all of our pieces coming together to triangulate and support our students. So it's not anyone working in isolation, but us all working together, again, with consistency and fairness in our practices. So as I listened to some of the questions, again, I noted that one of the questions was, is an intervention and a consequence used together in collaboration? Yes. A consequence and the intervention is hopefully, again, to keep that student from having those behaviors again and to change their behavioral patterns. We've also taken the sentence about may reclassify, but one thing that we've always noted, and Mr. Walters is one that's always in cabinet when it's time to discuss wording and verbiage, is that when you use must and will, that means you're held to that, and we no longer have discretion as we seek to have case-by-case scenario in some of our situations. So we still have to be mindful of which words we use so that it does keep us in alignment, but I'll certainly take that back to the committee. Again, the 3 documented incidents, we can take that back as well to make that verbiage stronger. One of the things noted was whether we're too lenient or whether classifications of levels. Ms. Kibler, if you could pull it up. We took things from our state regulations, so I'll refer to that just as an information item, noting that the classification of offenses wasn't necessarily based on where we thought things should be, but it's brought forth from our guidance from the State Department. Not only the state regulations, but also from a Safe Schools Committee, and Mr. Walters was a part of that committee in 2017, if I have the year right, in 2017, where they looked at this and they determined SRO involvement as well as the classification. So certainly, I did note one word in the regulation is that it provides the minimum statute for what we could use. So under Mr. Price's guidance, we can determine where things may go or may not go. But one thing I do want to note is that the template provided, it certainly doesn't include all the offenses that could happen within a day at a school. There is a note that says, and if you look up here, it says M, other acts as determined by local school authorities. That gives us that cachet for where we could place offenses that may not be deemed by something that's spelled out. And I think those are the major things that questions were asked, and if I'm missing something, please certainly pose it again, or Mr. Price, certainly, if you'd like to add anything, Mr. Walters, you as well.
I have a question.
Sure.
And I don't know that this is the right place to do this, but in disrupting class, level 1, the interventions, administrative conference and all that, but what we've heard from teachers and maybe bus drivers also is that if something happens, say something happens in my class at 10:30, well, by 10:40, that kid is back in the class. And I don't know if this is the place, but that might be in, there needs to be a cooling down period, I think, with whatever the offense is, with the child and with the teacher and maybe what else is going on. So sometimes you just take them out of class, they talk to them, and they send them right back. Well, the problem hasn't resolved, and then there's hurt feelings and that sort of thing. So I don't know if that's the place to put that, but that might be in a training somewhere.
And it's piggybacking off that, one of the things that we heard over and over that we all heard from teachers is about teachers being cursed at in the classroom, and staff members being cursed at, and nothing happens. They're right back in the classroom, smiling. And I know that the policy does address that, and you do a very good job in addressing that. It just needs to be consistent. It needs to happen.
Well, and jumping off that too is on the bus, somewhere on here, it says profanity on a bus is, I think it's immediately off the bus for 1 to 3 days maybe. Now, I am anti-profanity. I don't want you to think that I am. But I also think there might be situations. Now, if a kid comes on and if he's cursing out the bus driver, he needs to be gone.
Yep.
If he's cursing out another child, he needs to be gone. But if he walks on the bus and trips and acts, says a curse word, which lots of us are known to do, and sometimes it happens with kids also. And I think that might be an intervention, and we talk about, there's appropriate language at times. I don't know that he or she needs to be thrown off a bus for 3 days because they dropped a book on their foot and hurt, and, an outburst of profanity, so.
Mr. Chairman, I got one more thing. I probably get more calls about what I'm getting ready to say than anything. So when children fight, as far as I know, Superintendent Price, the policy is that when there's a fight, both kids get suspended. There is this thing out there called self-defense. I think when there's a fight, there really needs to be a thorough investigation, because if somebody comes up and punches me, they're going to probably get punched back, okay? That's self-defense. We have a lot of that going on in school where kids are attacked by other kids, and both kids suffer the consequences. I think we need to have deeper investigations into who started the fight, who threw the first punch. If there's an innocent victim in a fight, then that needs to be investigated by the investigator to find out what the whole problem was and who started it. But I get calls all the time, about their child getting suspended because they got attacked. Well, that's not right. So can we look in, Keith, to investigating fights a little bit more instead of just saying no matter whose fault it was across the board, if you were involved in a fight, you're both going home for 3 days. I think we need to be fair about whoever the bully was in the situation that started the fight.
I have a question for you.
Sure.
What happens to the kid during the investigation? So if you and Bill get into a fight in class, in my classroom, and, you're both pointing fingers at each other. He did, and, I've got 20 other kids in the room, and I didn't see who started it. So, but what do we do with the kids while we're investigating? Do they go home for the day? Do we go?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if I'm playing devil's advocate, but I'm just thinking the whole picture because, and I understand that. I mean, again, if somebody attacks me and I'm defending myself, I should not be suspended. It should not be on my record. But we need to remove them from the situation.
Got to be removed.
Students would, in that case, be suspended until the pending
And you can
further
rescind the
investigation.
suspension, but I think, if it happens at 9 o'clock in the morning, you both need to go home, cool off, because what do we do with them in the meantime?
How soon is an investigation, Mr. Bryce, conducted after a fight? I mean, is it right away?
It should be, yes, sir. Once something like that raises to that level of a disruption, the investigation should be right then and there. Shouldn't be 2 or 3 days down the road. It should be right when the situation happens.
Is the policy now when two kids are fighting, immediately that day they both get suspended? Is that the current policy?
No, sir, it doesn't necessarily state that.
Okay.
In a situation where a student has no choice, they have no way to escape, no way to walk away, no way to turn to someone, then if their only option at that point, for example, if a student's on a bus and someone attacks another student and the student's pinned down on the bus and they have no way out of that situation but to kick their way or push or punch their way out of it because they're trapped, that's a self-defense situation, and that needs to be looked at very carefully.
Right, and that was pretty much my point.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. Any other discussion?
Yes. I have one more question.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Bethany. Okay, on the failure to complete work. All right, I'm just, and again, maybe I'm playing devil's advocate. Is failure to complete work a discipline issue or an academic issue?
If it's coded as level 1, so what could be options?
It's coded, I think it's coded as level 1.
So it's not always a referral to necessarily the administrator. A teacher can provide interventions within the classroom, so it may not rise to that of a office referral. It may be a class referral.
Right, and I mean, find it hard to believe that a teacher, if a kid didn't do his work, that he would write a referral and say, well, he didn't do his work. Well, that requires
ma'am.
other things going on. Let me talk to the parent, let me talk to the child.
And that's where it's key for us to make sure we're providing this reteaching as well as teaching to our staff members as well as our students.
Exactly.
And that's why I hone in on the point that it's not just one entity that we have to focus on, which is the punitive measures to our students.
Right.
We truly have to re-educate ourselves as the adults in how to address discipline and what's determined as a classroom incident versus office managed. And there is a flow chart, that PBIS teaches us, whether it's an office referral or a classroom incident, and just truly how to be positive in nature.
Right.
Ms. Hamill?
Dr. Gowns.
I think we still have to remember that these are children.
Yeah.
I will be very honest. We're talking about children from very young age to high school children. And we're talking about expectations. And we're talking about expectations for everybody. And so I think we have to really look at that we set these expectations for students, and parents have to know those expectations. But we also have to have those expectations for teachers, for any other person that touches the life of a child in our schools.
Yep.
And I really think that's a serious conversation to have. You can have all the discipline in the world or consequences, and I'm all for not getting by with doing. My children would tell you that. But I will tell you, that isn't going to change the behavior unless we all have the same expectations, we all have the same conversations, the bus driver with the assistant principal, the teacher with their administration, back with the parents. We've got to have all that working together. I think we did a good job with making a chart, but there's no cookie cutter that we're going to be able to come up with that's going to address every situation for every child in the circumstance that we find ourselves. So I think we did a good job, but I think we have to be realistic and understand the expectations, and I think that's critical with this whole piece that we're talking about.
Thank you. Good point.
Thank you, ma'am.
And just one other.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, in a situation where there was a fight or whatever in a classroom, how long does it normally take to get a video? Because there were kids who were wrongfully suspended. So how long does it take to get a video? I mean, if we wait a week or so, then, people are getting punished that probably shouldn't be.
All right. Good evening, Mr. Chairman, board members, Mr. Price. It sounds like this is in my area. So first of all, our classrooms don't have cameras in them. There's areas that we don't have cameras. We have hallways, gyms, common areas, cafeterias and
Bathrooms,
such.
that's a
So
good
in
place.
restrooms, yeah, so those places don't have them. So, and hopefully, when I answer your question, I can also come back to yours a little bit, Mr. Cox, about how it's investigated in fights. So if a fight has taken place, and obviously administration gets notified, they begin their piece of it immediately. They also should be contacting the SRO. Every school now, including Howard, has a full-time SRO assigned to it. And what their first step, they have two steps. Their first step is to determine, did whatever took place rise to the level of criminality? In other words, is there a possibility that one or both or multiple people could be charged? If they look at that initial investigation and make a determination, no, they back off. It's a disciplinary matter, and SROs, by their contracts, are not disciplinarians. That goes to our school administrators. If they determine that it is, then their investigation would continue to determine if charges should be filed, if there's injuries involved, do they need to be separated for long term, when and if they come back to school. They have to look at all that. What they will then do, if they get to that point in investigation, they're considering charging somebody, then under state law, victims' rights come into play. So they have to contact the parent of the victims, and in some cases, both of them can be suspects and victims for a mutual situation. Sometimes some person is engaged in self-defense, but then in that self-defense, if they go too far and exceed what initiated it in the first place, potentially both could be charged. So the SRO has to sift through all of that and make that determination, then contact the parents of the victim or victims and determine if they want to prosecute. Now, the decision to prosecute is solely in the area of the law enforcement officer. It's not something that a parent can force somebody to do. It's not something school administration can force somebody to do. They can provide input, but that's solely in their discretion to do that. So in many cases, what they will do, if all the parents are satisfied with the situation that discipline would be sufficient, then they'll disengage and turn it back over to the administrator. In some cases, the parents say, nope, I don't like this, it needs to be, throw the book at them, then they can file charges. Sometimes when parents want people prosecuted, the officer won't file charges because they don't think it rose to the level of criminality. So they have a level of discretion that they have to exercise too. So when you get into these type scenarios, it's really a team effort to do that. If there's video, they look at it. Our administrators also are looking around to see, because what happens, the first thing something goes on, these come out. And so they try to determine if there's personal device videos that may help in their investigation with it. So, and they've gone through training on how to conduct these sort of investigations, and what the steps are, and most importantly, where the line is between law enforcement involvement and disciplinary actions. But hopefully that answered several questions.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Moore?
I was just going to say, I guess moving forward administratively, I just would like to suggest that they do a thorough investigation before punishment is handed out as well, and perhaps that can kind of take care of some issues that we've been dealing with.
I'd like to thank all of you for all the good points that you've made, and thank you, Dr. Giles and Mr. Walters. Thank you very much. Is there anything else? Okay, we're going to move on. You're still up, Dr. Giles, for Administration Rule IKF-R graduation requirements.
Okay, so again, to the pre-established protocol, the revisions presented to you this evening in this policy are in alignment with our policy for updated graduation requirements. The requirements, as you'll see the strike-through, the requirements were 7 electives or units. However, with personal finance now being a requirement, and it's a half-unit elective, it now makes electives 6.5 units as the requirement, and personal finance, that course will be a half unit of credit. Therefore, the students still have 24 total units of credit that are needed in order for them to satisfy graduation requirements. The only note here is that we are now in alignment with what our State Department or our state legislation has approved, which would be 6.5 electives, and that half unit now moving to personal finance.
Are there any questions? Thank you very much. Moving on to the next piece. Mr. Doug Jenkins, Policy GCC, Employee Leave and Absences Update.
Good evening, Chairman Gaskins, Vice Chair Ford, members of the board, Mr. Price, district staff, and guests. I come before you this evening to talk about changes that need to be made in Policy GCC to coincide with the revised modified year-round calendar that will start with start dates. If you will look, there you go, right there. With this new start date, we're going to have employees that are going to be starting in the month of July versus the month of August. So therefore, we're going to have to look at reallocating when they are advanced their sick leave days. Employees will still in those categories receive the same amount of days that they always have. It will just be when they will get their advanced sick leave days. We also have this in Policy GCCR. So what we're asking this evening is that this be stricken from Policy GCC and left in GCC-R to where if changes have to be made, it only requires 1 reading versus 2 readings. So again, just to reestablish, the employees will still get their same sick leave days that they've received all along. It's just how many days and when they will get advanced.
Are there any questions?
And there's one other part as well, but the question about this. your question.
Thank you, Mr.
Nope,
Jenkins.
wait, this is on page 4. There's another change.
Oh, okay. Missed that.
In going through this policy, we realized that there is some extremely antiquated vernacular in here. We no longer have a War Department. So therefore, we need to change that. So you can see what's being struck out is the governor of the War Department, Treasury Department, Navy Department, Air Force, and added now is the governor, the Department of Defense, the Department of the Army, Department of the Air Force, Department of Navy, Department of the Treasury, or any other department or agency in the government of the United States having authority to issue lawful orders requiring military service. And what that deals with is the 15 days of training that anybody who is a armed service member received throughout the school year.
Thank you. Sorry, I missed that.
Oh, that's all good.
All right.
Thank you.
All right, that is all of our information items. Now it's time for our board and superintendent comments or requests. Mr. Cox?
I just want to again reiterate the staff who put together this discipline policy. It was just, it was an honor to serve on the committee with a couple of you, but thank you, staff, for doing such a great job on putting this together.
Thank you.
I might jump on Mr. Price's toes here a little bit, but I just want to put a shout out for the beach program that they'll be performing tomorrow and Thursday. I'll leave the details to you, Mr. Price, but I've been kind of hanging out with them a little bit, and we have such, again, I'm going to tell you what fantastic children and how talented children we have in this district. So y'all need to go out and see them tomorrow and Thursday. And thank you, Ms. Smith, because you've done a fabulous job. And Ms. Bombeck, great job.
Yes.
All right, Mr. Superintendent, Mr. Price.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair, ladies and gentlemen of the board. Our summer programs are in full swing. This week we have several performances and displays by students in our Summer Beach program. This includes choral, concerts, drama performances, and art displays, and all of these will be held at Georgetown High tomorrow and Thursday. This Thursday at 4 o'clock, we will also celebrate our retirees with a ceremony here at J.B. Beck as we thank them for their years of service to our students and our schools. We will have some irregular board meetings over the next few weeks. As a reminder, we will have a special called board meeting next Tuesday, June 27th at 5:30 to approve the budget. We will have our summer board retreat and workshop on July 13th, beginning at 8:30 here at J.B. Beck. And due to Independence Day, we will only have one regular board meeting in July, and that will be on July 18th. And finally, we say goodbye to 3 of our executive leadership team members who have decided to retire. Mr. Mike Kaviris, Executive Director of Special Services, Ms. Stephanie Stuckey, Director of Student Interventions and Support Services, and Mr. Tyrone Davis, Assistant Superintendent of Operations, will be retiring at the end of the month. All 3 of them have dedicated a significant number of years of service to Georgetown County School District, and we would not be the district we are today without their leadership. Their commitment and their ideas will be greatly missed, but it will not be a true goodbye, as each of them will be returning to the classroom in pursuit of their first love as teachers. Mr. Davis will be teaching personal finance at Waccamaw High. Ms. Stuckey will be teaching elementary at Browns Ferry, and Mr. Kaviris will be teaching special education at Andrews High. We know our students will be in great hands with these 3 educators, as we wish them all the happiness in the world in their retirement and in their return to the classroom. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Mr. Gaskins?
Yes.
I'd be remiss if I did not share Shark Tank last week, that our young people that participated and the folks that coordinated it, what a great job they did. And the ideas that they proposed were super. And the adults that work with that program, a big shout out and a thank you, because it was an excellent program. And I certainly want to say thank you.
Okay, thank you. The next thing on our agenda is executive session for the purpose of recommendation for our Chief Operation Officer. Is there a motion that we go into executive session?
So moved.
It's been moved and second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
We are now in executive session.
I move that the board approves the recommendation of Dr. Tony Dent McNair to be hired as Chief Operations Officer effective July 15th, 2023.
Is there a motion? Is there a motion?
Second that motion.
It has been second. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, I'll call for the question. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed? The motion is carried. And our meeting is now adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank you.